Okay. All right. Just as we get started, this coming Shabbos is the double parsha. You know, the Torah is divided, as we said before, so that you each week you read a section of the Torah, and traditionally, where you end one week, you begin the next week. All right? And it's so to go through the course of a year, we read the entire Torah. However, because the way the holidays fall, there's sometimes the holidays on Shabbat, in which case we don't have the regular Shabbat Torah reading. Chol Hamoed, Pesach, for example, Passover, the Sabbath during Passover, we did not read the regular Torah portion. And so because of that, there has to be a certain degree of fluidity as to how the readings work. So that some years, a couple of them are combined, like this week, Bahar B'Chukotai, and a couple weeks ago, Achrimot Kadoshim, that were also linked together. In a leap year, since we have 4 week extra Sabbaths during the course of the year, normally that means you're going to have to break up some of these double portions so that you can have a Shabbat Torah reading that's not repetitive of the week before. But in normal years, most normal years, Bahar B'Chukotai are read together, and we thus have that going on. And again, we're really finishing up the subject matter of Sefer Vayikra, of Leviticus, and I was going to say something here. I don't know. We have, the laws of the sabbatical year are found. The Torah says that 7 years you have a cycle, the Shemitah cycle. The 7th year, the land is left fallow. You're not supposed to work it. Farmers are supposed to not do anything to deal with their crops, their trees, etc. And then their debts are canceled. When people make a loan, the biblical ideal of the system was that loans were not supposed to be at interest, but loans are supposed to be paid back. But so you have this concept of the sabbatical year where loans were canceled. Later on, when it became very clear that economically that would cause a problem, and people would not be so prepared to grant a loan just before the sabbatical year, and therefore the rabbis created what was known as a prose bull. And the prose bull essentially was one of these things around, you work your way around. Debts between people were canceled, but debts to the Beit Din, to the court, were not. And, like you always got to pay the tax man, right? You always got to pay your taxes. Anything else you can maybe get away with, but the tax man. All right, so the courts were in lieu of the tax man. So a document was composed in which you gave the rights to the debt to the court to collect. That was, as the world became much more capitalistic, is not necessarily the best terminology for it, because capitalism didn't yet exist as we know it. But as money became something that was important in and of itself, in the agricultural era, even still in the Talmud, there's this reflection that land was wealth. Okay? And even for debts, if I had a debt, the documentation would have a lien on my land. I don't know what people did if they didn't own land to borrow money. But that lien on the land was what protected the lender. Okay? And so the rabbis said that the only mechanism for forcing paying off a debt was through land. and the whole stuff, a lot in the Talmud. Again, later on, when land became less important, and or at least for the Jewish community, where people were much more likely to become merchants and salespeople and artisans and not farmers owning land, then it gave way to other ways of perhaps enforcing a loan on the fancy word is chattel. So this concept of debts, it was fine in a world in which the debts were mostly enabled to buy seed or something like that for the next harvest season. You weren't borrowing money to use money for profit in some way. And that's why the Torah forbids interest. And that's one thing that the rabbinic tradition has never been able to circumvent in any way. So technically, you're not allowed to charge interest one Jew to another. In the medieval period, one of the ways that in a sense went around it was Jews, according to the Torah, were allowed to lend money at interest to non-Israelites. And Jews were obviously, if they're going to borrow money from a non-Israelite, that individual is probably going to charge them interest. And so you can figure out what would happen is one guy who loaned somebody else money, who loaned somebody else money, and it gets back in a circle. But Muslims still follow that very strictly. They have to deal with that in terms of their economics and everything. All right. So again, a way somewhat around it was created by the rabbis called a heter iska. The heter iska was a document that the two parties would sign, in which the lender heter iska. Iska is Aramaic. Heter is Hebrew. Osek, it comes from the activity. Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. I think it's from the Aramaic esek, an activity, an action, something you're involved with. But that may be the same thing, common root. Right? But the heter iska is designed so that the person who's lending the money has to bear some possibility of loss of the principal in some way. But he becomes a partner, and so his profits is what takes the place of interest. I don't have any depth of knowledge of how it operates.
Of the Islamic banks work is that they call it profits. You might call it interest, but it's called profits, and you can share in profits.
Yeah.
But not.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's
a lot of.
Yeah, it's legal.
Yeah,
they're legalese. That's why lawyers get lots of money, as ex-President Trump found out this week. All right. So that's part of what we find in this week's portion, the idea that slaves were set free. Now, by slaves, we're talking about Hebrews who are bonded as servitude, and not a non-Jewish slave. Okay. And then at the end of 70 years, 50 years, excuse me, you had the Jubilee year, in which land, which was normally part and parcel of a family heritage, at least ideally, all land in the land of Israel had been divided up in the time of Joshua, when they conquered the land of Canaan. And therefore, you own land because your father owned the land and his father owned the land, which is true often in the world anyway. But that familial right to the property meant that in the Jubilee year, it has to return to the family.
You never even bought and sold land. You bought and sold leaseholds.
Yes. Unless there are certain ways that would not happen, and that land would actually be sold. And if it's property inside a city, dwellings in a city didn't have the protection of the farms. All right. Right, so these are some of the things that we read about as we end Sefer Vayikra, and we're about to get into Bamidbar. It's in the middle of the wilderness, which is coming up. Okay.
Midbar was mine.
Your mitzvah, mine was Bahalotcha. That was because my parents and I had a cousin, and we had to have our bar mitzvah together so they could share everything on the expense side of everything. Oh well. Maybe that's making. Yeah, Gary was there, so I got to see my cousin. Okay. All right, so last week, if you listen carefully to my wonderful presentation, as I've been told, it was a great Academy Award winning. In Judaism, as in every culture, every religion, the important milestones in life are celebrated. And it has nothing to do with religion per se. It has to do with a social need. You want to celebrate the important events. And why do we celebrate birthdays? And what difference? It's just another day of the week. Right? But it's each birthday, another year in life is something that we want to celebrate. Now, Judaism doesn't really do that. There really is no birthday party kind of stuff in Judaism. And one of the problems with the modern bar and bat mitzvah, I don't know, I meant to listen to myself, but I didn't. So if I'm repeating some of it, that's okay. The problem with the modern bar mitzvah, as somebody once said, they emphasize more the bar than the mitzvah. To such an extent that it's become a popular thing that non-Jews have adopted. They should have bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah parties too, so they can show off their wealth. I mean, that's how that's from the parental side. But to strictly understand, and I emphasize this time and time again, you are a bar mitzvah, you are a bat mitzvah on your birthday. That's the only birthday that really Judaism pays much attention to. Traditionally for girls when they were 12, for boys when they were 13. The basis behind that really is the onset of puberty. The Talmud says when you have visible signs of puberty, evidence, normally by beginning to have pubic hairs, 2 hairs makes you that adult, right, in that place. Oto makom. Right? Anyway, one famous thing is, why is Hebrew the perfect language, in quotations? Because it has no profanity in it whatsoever in classical Hebrew, not even names for the sexual organs. Okay, and even the words used to refer to sexual activity are euphemisms. Tashmish shamita, using the bed. Okay, so obviously you don't want to go around and asking, hey, well, has this individual started having a couple of hairs down there? And so eventually, since most young women at the age of 12, give or take, is when they begin to mature sexually, most boys around 13, that's why that difference traditionally was there, that became the mark of one's requirement to observe the mitzvot. And what a bar and bat mitzvah really is simply a birthday and an acknowledgement that the individual is now an adult as far as mitzvot are concerned. Okay? You don't have to do anything. You hear these stories that somebody was 80 years old and they finally had their bar mitzvah. That's not really true. It means they had a whoop-de-doo. Or they got called to the Torah. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the day before they got called to the Torah, there was still a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, whatever the case may be. So if I ask them the test, what makes you a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah? Just turning the age. That's right. That's the correct answer. Okay. Not to say that that's going to be on the test in any way. No, it probably will, because then I get revenge and some people don't pay attention. There are questions like that I have on the test that people don't answer correctly, which tells me something about how much they were paying attention when I emphasize it. If I just, threw it off to the side, it'd be one thing, all right. So also there's a fascinating thing. It didn't last very long, but for about 150 years, give or take, in Europe, they had a special ceremony when it was basically just for the boys at that time, as was bar mitzvah. But when they began their education around the year around 5 or so, and we know that in German Jewry had this whole thing. They went by the riverside, and they would have the child read from begin the Aleph Bet, teaching them. And one tradition was to write it on with honey on a tablet. They would write the Aleph Bet. What?
You said all this before.
Yeah, well, I should be on that tape, on the video. Okay. All right. So, yeah, good. All right. So I'm just want to hit a couple of the highlights. Right. And for marriage, once again, we're talking about an important milestone in people's lives. And the idea that marriage is called in Hebrew kiddushin. Right? Erusin and kiddushin. Erusin is creating the betrothal. Traditionally, when it says in the Mishnah, there are 3 ways to contract the marital relationship. Erusin, shtar, kesef, ubia. Through the giving of a document. Man gives a document, the woman says, you are consecrated to me as my wife through this documentation. Kesef, money. Behold, you're consecrated to me through this money, which is what the ring represents today. So when we have the wedding ceremony, we say, Hayaret, the man says, Hare at mekudesh li b'tabat zo. You're consecrated to me with this ring. And the last one was sexual relations for the sake of marriage. That created what was called erusin, a betrothal, which needed a get to sever if necessary, but was not full-fledged marriage. You're not really supposed to live together at that point. And then a period of time later, you would have what is called the chuppah, in which nobody really knows for sure exactly what that meant. There are all kinds of discussions of what was meant by that when the rabbis were creating the ceremonies. So is it just going under the canopy? That's the chuppah. Is it putting the veil over the bride? Is that the chuppah? Is the chuppah really when you're sequestered alone as husband and wife for the first time? Right, so all those elements are found in our ceremonies today. And indeed, the period of time that you are supposed to be separate with your spouse after the wedding ceremony is determined by the amount of time you think it requires to have the sexual relationship take place.
Are they separate a week before?
That's a relatively modern custom. And some observe it for the week before. I tell you, my son and daughter-in-law were absolutely sick with it. They hadn't spent much time separate except going home at night once they got engaged, and they eventually had to see each other. They just couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. Others do. Some may wait even a month of not seeing each other. It's a really torture. But
Rabbi,
yes.
how does the Bedekin fit into like what you're describing?
Well, you mean in terms of the ceremony?
No, like in terms of the like consecration with the ring, like being
Well, it has nothing to do with,
consecrated the ring.
remember, the things that are talking about, the star kesabia, documentation, money, sexual relations creates the erusin. For lack of a better term in English, we say the betrothal. The chuppah, or what we call today nisuin, is completing the process. So all these are elements that we have together today as the completing process. So what, just then finish up real quickly. So at the wedding ceremony, what we do today, it's all together. You come under the chuppah, stand under the chuppah, the bride and groom are under the chuppah, whatever whoop-de-doos you got going in. There's no halacha whatsoever about how you get there, as long as you're under there. The wine for the blessings, the giving of the ring. Traditionally, we say we call Birchat Erusin, the betrothal blessings, which therefore the Bedekin, which came earlier, is kind of out of order. The following the blessings, the groom says Hariyat Mekudeshli, and gives the ring to the bride, traditionally on the right index finger. They don't have, it doesn't have to stay there, but that's a traditional finger that's done with. They used to have in Europe very fancy rings that were used that belonged to the community with a big house on it, that kind of thing. Yeah. And you see them in museums still today. Then that would be separated to show that they're two separate things. That's traditionally where the ketubah would be read. Reading the ketubah is really not to waste time, but spread out time. Rabbis might speak them to spread out the two parts. And then comes the Sheva Brachot, the 7 wedding blessings, and drinking the wine again each time, and the breaking of the glass. Now, in the traditional ceremony, the only thing was that a man gave a woman a ring. In non-traditional circles, many conservative synagogues, at some point, the rabbi says the woman will give the man a ring, and traditionally it's made clear that it's not exchange of rings. You're not exchanging rings. What it is a sign of the woman's love for the man. It has no halachic standing, traditionally. That's why you can have it, not have it. I used to have a ring until our 50th anniversary. Was it 50th? Yeah, I think it was 50. Went to Hawaii, went swimming. There went the ring. All right. Never wanted to replace it. That's the ring that we had. But again, my wife gave it to me in Yichud when we were alone. I will have those who want. The bride will say, so you can do it after we read the ketubah and placing the ring and say, Ani ledodi v'dodi li, on my beloved is mine. Sheva brachot, break the glass. Again, I'm sure I'm repeating now. That's a reminder of the destruction of the temple. The idea being that the rabbi said we should always, hold back a little bit of our joy. And I usually say something to the fact that, it's the temple, however you look at it in terms of its restoration, it represents the world not being complete. And we hope that the joy of the bride and groom that are sharing today with the families and all that will help bring that day closer together. And that's why we break the glass, to hopefully to tell us to bring it together. And in traditional circles, the whole week after the wedding, every time there's somebody new and there's a minyan present, you can say the wedding blessings, the Sheva Brachot, the 7 wedding blessings. And that's why colloquially they're called Sheva Brachos. You're coming to the Sheva Brachos for Chaim Yankel and Sarah Rivka. And people do that all week, lunch, breakfast, dinner, whatever, till the end of the week, the celebration.
Is the Dechen before the ketubah or after?
Normally it's after. What happens is, a lot depends upon the rabbi and who's doing it, how traditional minded the family is. Okay, the most traditional way you'll find in Orthodox circles is the men are in one room and the women are in another. The men have the schnapps and the women have the good hors d'oeuvres. That's how it usually turns out. So some of the men go back and forth. All right. And at some point in Orthodox circles, they still have what is called the, not the ketubah, but the, Tanoim. Tanaim originally were the agreements between the two families, who's going to have how many blankets and horses and cows and geese or whatever it may be. Today, it's all pro forma, but it's still, again, it's Orthodox world still usually insists on it. After the Bedekin is the Tanoim are signed and read out, then the ketubah is signed. Tanaim, the conditions, an iska for the couple. Right? Then what will take place is they sign the ketubah. Then the groom would be marched to where the bride is, and then the bedekin would take place then. The way I most always do it, because usually they're not separate like that. The bride and groom are together. And most, I think it's almost, I've done that 99% of the time. I think only once or twice not. The bride and groom are both there for the signing of the ketubah, the signing of the civil license, because those have to be, the civil license is to be witnessed. The ketubah is only witness that the groom is giving it to her. The real signing of the witnesses is not as important as the witnesses being given under the chuppah. But in those cases, what we usually do again is similar. We take care of the government. Then we do the ketubah. And then I usually say to the parents of the bride and groom, you got any special words for your children at this point? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Then I ask the groom to stand behind the bride and do the bedekin. And that's again how in non-Orthodox circles it's mostly done. And then there are those circles who don't want veils at all anymore. Okay. And all kinds of different variations on a theme of how they handle it. Okay.
What's the significance of a family member not being able to sign the ketubah? Why is that a thing?
Well, it's really not a question of the ketubah as is a question of signing any document as a witness.
Mm.
In order to be, traditionally, in order to be a witness, you should have no relationship to either the other witness or the parties for which you're witnessing the agreement. Because that way you have no bias of any kind involved with it. So that's the reason for the fact that they are not supposed to be related to bride and groom or to each other. Mm-hmm.
And my sister.
Who was the rabbi?
Oh, Dr. Penn. I said you too.
You have a pen?
No, I'm looking for my pencil.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, I'm so bad.
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's it. I made a mistake one time and had a sister's husband sign. He was a brother-in-law. That was a mistake.
So me
Yeah.
and my sister-in-law after the wedding, sister-in-law.
Yeah. Well, no, that's ketubah. The civil license, we don't care. Again, it depends on your rabbi. And the traditionally, witnesses almost everything in Jewish law had to be male and above the age of bar mitzvah. Okay, they had to be of legal age, which is bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. You mean in the Talmud? Yeah, I couldn't write off the hand tell you where in the Talmud it says that they have to be of age, but yes. I mean, that's part of what being, what you wouldn't ask a 5-year-old child to sign a legal document today, right? I don't know what the legal definition, probably 18, whatever they consider to be of age. Traditionally, again, you talk to your rabbi when you're involved with a wedding. I don't make pass judgment here on for anybody. I can tell you what I do, and you can go to your rabbi and do what they do. I follow very traditional, but yes, women will allow the rabbi. So, if it's a female rabbi, I'm almost 100%, I'll say 99.9% certain that she would permit a female to be a witness. 0.1% of maybe not. All right, but certainly today, when women first started becoming rabbis in the conservative movement, some of them were very careful not to act as witnesses or act as members of a Beit Din, not necessarily because they felt it was wrong to do so, but because they knew that there were others who would not be happy with that. And so in order to avoid problems, they withheld from doing it. Today, I would say the majority of my colleagues would accept a woman as a witness for it, and therefore they're not so concerned about it. Okay, but again, you have to talk to your rabbi, he or she. So we to cover all of that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, despite what Beit Shammai says, and despite what you sometimes read in the New Testament, Judaism accepts the concept of divorce. Ideally, when a couple gets together, creates a life together, creates a home life together, that is going to be forever. But the reality is that sometimes it doesn't work out. Now, just like the ketubah itself is, today it's mostly ceremonial, but originally it was a legal agreement. Marriage is a legal contract. And we think of it very romantically in our day and age, but we're seeing that more and more. You see that amongst the very wealthy when you have a prenuptial agreement, the prenups, which is to make sure one of the spouses doesn't get all the money from the other, right? What is the ketubah? The ketubah is the husband promises to provide for the wife during their marriage. And if something happens in marriage, provide for it through a monetary sum. And the wife promises in the ketubah to live with her husband, as this befits a Jewish wife. The burden, most of the burden of the ketubah is on the man, right? Since he has had in the ancient world much more generally financial ability than the woman would have. Right? So we read in Deuteronomy, it says, if a man finds ervat davar, something unseemly in his wife, right? And he writes her sefer kritut, a document of separation, right? And she goes and marries somebody else, right? That's the only mention of divorce in the Torah. But even later on in the Bible, there is mention of the term of get, of a divorce document. But where we find it in Deuteronomy, it doesn't tell us what it is. The rabbis understood it to mean something that was a complete separation, severing the connection between the two parties. Before we get to that point, so the question is, what kind of grounds are there for a divorce, for a get? So I alluded to, Beit Shammai says, he takes the passage in Deuteronomy very literally, which is one of the interpretations I believe found in the New Testament, that if a man suspects his wife of adulterous affair or doing some other kind of misbehavior that is not seemly for a Jewish woman, I don't know necessarily what that means today, but then it could be anything. Right now, we're reading about the laws of Sotah. If a man says to his wife, I don't want you being alone with that guy, and she's alone with that guy, it's grounds for divorce. So Rabbi Akiva later on, essentially, Beit Hillel says, no, if you see he's not happy with her, he can give her a get. And Rabbi Akiva basically says if she burns his beans, she burns dinner. All right. Well, I like to interpret it as meaning that Rabbi Akiva is saying, if the relationship is so bad that a burnt dinner gets you upset like that, there's obviously deep problems. Right? But sometimes one of the problems we have in the modern Jewish world is Chazal, the rabbis of the Talmudic era, were very strong believers in Shalom Bayit, in peace in the home. And really believed you had to do everything possible to maintain that home. It even says in the Talmud that a woman would rather live with a man she doesn't love, I can't quote it exactly right at the moment, than to be alone, be divorced. Okay. So unfortunately, especially in the Orthodox world for the most part, they still take that on a very literal level, and still insist that a woman would rather be married than divorced. So they're very reluctant to force the issue, if sometimes, which I'll come to. But in theory, divorce is very simple. The man gets 2 witnesses, writes the sefer kritut to build a divorce, whatever that exactly means. The get. Okay, he writes the get, gives it to the wife in the presence of witnesses, and the story, they're divorced. But for various reasons, the rabbis made it much more difficult for that to take place. Today, it has to be in the presence of a Beit Din. Already the Talmud says that there are certain rules how the get has to be composed. It has to be written a certain specific way. It must be written specifically for the man and that woman. If there are 2 people who have the same names, and somebody had a get written and didn't use it, that cannot be used for the other 2 people. There's no fill in the blanks.
As there is in
Ketubah can fill in the blanks. But the get must be handwritten for that specific couple. That's all right. You see, already they're making hurdles to jump over. The names must be spelled out properly. Any nicknames that a person is known by have to appear in the get. Or for example, my full English name is Martin Jeffrey Berman. The only one who ever called me Martin Jeffrey, of course, was my mother. But if we were writing a get that I was giving to my wife, it should never happen. It'll only be 52 years this summer. It would have my title, Harav Menachem Yosef ben Ze'ev Berman. Menachem Yosef, the son of Ze'ev Berman. Hamuchune, who is known as Martin J. Berman, or Martin Jeffrey Berman, or Marty. Okay, all of those would take, all of those, any way that you're identified would be in there. You don't have any nicknames? Schmendrick? Or the older one. The older one was the guy couldn't remember what his Hebrew name was. What did your grandmother call you? Oh, I know what it was. Vilda Chaya. Wild animal. The Schmendrick. It's a term of endearment. I don't know if it has an actual meaning or not. Shlemiel has somebody who's, now that's Yiddish, and that has a very definite meaning, and it's not, and it's a 4-letter word in Yiddish. Okay, it's more letters, but it's a version of a Yiddish 4-letter word.
Yeah. Sure. Please. Later. Yeah.
It's a member. It's a male. What makes a man a man?
No. Yeah, it's a foreign language.
You know, like anything, any words can have different levels of meaning and what have you. Yeah, it's used differently, but the correct definition, unless you're, yeah, okay. All right, so what happens is there's a whole theater a whole play that takes place. Go before the Beit Din. The husband has to receive from the sofer as a gift, or he pays for it, whatever, the paper and the pen, etc. Then he entrusts, appoints the scribe to write a get, even if he has to do it 100 times, for the sake of his and for the sake of her. And then whatever time it takes for him to write, and there's a specific rules on how it has to be written. And then he comes back where they are gathered together, and they get it together again with the Beit Din, and he presents the get, and they take a look at it. Is this the get that you wrote? And he says yes to the witnesses, and the husband is given the get, and it's folded up, and he drops it into her hands, and she takes 4 steps with it, making it hers. She then returns it to the Beit Din. They open it up, take a look. Is this the get you gave her? Yeah, what else could it be in the meantime? But all right. And then what they do is they cut it so they can never be used again. And then what the court does, it issues to both parties what is called a patur. A patur is a permission to get married after 3 months. The 3-month limit is because by 3 months, normally a woman would be showing if she's pregnant. And so the 3 months appears a number of times in Jewish law when parentage is an issue. If a woman's husband dies, she's not allowed to marry for 3 months.
So if she is pregnant within that 3 months, is the get canceled?
No, but the parentage of the child is assumed to be the parent of the former husband. The child, that's all. It's to take care of parentage issues. Yeah?
I have an interesting question about parenting. So I understand that,
Are you a little bit off topic right now, Gary?
no, it's kind of segueing.
We're talking about.
We never go off topic. It's Judaism, so we're always on topic.
So I just had a thought, so it is a matriarchal lineage.
It's a
and
very,
that's
yes and no, yeah. Okay.
Because we know that the woman gives birth and we know that the child.
You can always, for sure, who, at least until modern systems.
Is it completely fair to?
Well, there are a couple of things here that it fits into different things. Let's take this example. When a woman converts, she's theoretically also not supposed to get married for 3 months. Some have, if you take a pregnancy test to ensure the fact that the woman's not pregnant yet, then some rabbis are willing to forego the 3 months. Let's say a couple's been separated for years. They just never had a get. This has happened, I don't know how many times that I've dealt with it, right? And now that she wants to get married and they discover there's no get, so they have a get issued. She has to wait another 3 months. So again, a pregnancy test is sometimes used to go past that technicality. Parentage, the only time parentage comes up is when there's some kind of a challenge, right? So until the modern era and DNA and all of that, and pregnancy tests. See, the pregnancy tests, or the 3 months is in lieu of a pregnancy test. If the woman's not yet pregnant, then there's no problem, no question. But how do you know she's not pregnant that a couple hundred years ago? So that's the 3 month status. And that's hand in hand with matrilineality in that sense. Because you always know that the woman who bears the child is the mother of the child. Okay, so now did I address it in the last week? I don't know if I did in that video. there are two kinds of status in Judaism. One is matrilineal status. Are you a Jew? If you're a Jew, your status within the Jewish people is patrilineal. If your father's a Kohen, you're a Kohen. Your father's a Levi, you're a Levi. You're a Bat Levi, you're a Yisrael, you're a Yisrael. If there is some kind of what is, the language is used, a pagum, some kind of disability not genetic, in a hierarchical social status issue, i.e., for example, if the woman is not Jewish, that's quote a pagum. That's why the child's not Jewish. If either parent is a mamzer, the offspring of an illicit relationship between a married woman and someone who's not her husband, that creates what is traditionally as a mamzer. So in the child of a mamzer, no matter which parent is the mamzer, is a mamzer. Okay. So it's in that Mishnah where we come to this idea about whether one is Jewish or not, depending on the mother. One rabbi wants to say every child, if the mother's Jewish and the father's not, is a mamzer. Jewish tradition accepted that it was regarded as a legitimate Jewish child. But there were issues with even that. Just yesterday in the Talmud, yeah, I'm going off course, sorry. Yesterday in the Talmud, there was a discussion about Agrippus the king and whether or not he was legitimately Jewish. And according to some, his mother was Jewish, but his father was not. King Herod, of course, he wasn't originally Jewish. But in any case, could you make him the king if his father wasn't Jewish? You know, and so they want to say that's a disability that would prevent him from being a king or being put into a position of authority. If someone has a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father, in traditional circles, they would question whether or not that individual can have certain positions in the community. Okay? So, yeah. While we have, if you remember, we talked about marriage. Traditionally, the man creates the marriage by giving the ring to the woman. Since he creates the marriage, only he can dissolve the marriage. So power of divorce, and this is one of the things, unfortunately, traditional Jewish law, is solely in the hands of the husband. If he's a decent person, and you don't have no problems. But if he's not, and we have a lot of those who, the word you used earlier, that you're not supposed to use.
Well, I didn't know. I thought it meant like.
Well, but that's what he would be. No, not like you are.
There's a bunch of them we need.
All right, it's all right. Sorry. Oh, okay, hold that for a moment and it will come to that. Okay, so since the woman has a clear disadvantage here, even if the Beit Din says, you know, she deserves a divorce, you've mistreated her, you're not taking care of her properly, what have you, the court can't issue a get. She can't issue a get. Now, in Reform, they may do it. In Reconstructionists, they may do it. But in traditional circles, they don't. Now, on the other hand, it's very clear that the rabbis understood that the Beit Din, the power of the Beit Din, is such that should a Beit Din decide to say some of your property doesn't belong to you, because Hefker Beit Din, they can declare your field, it's not yours anymore. You have no right to it. The Beit Din is decided for whatever basic reason. That should be a good reason. It's called Hefker Beit Din. And so now, if the court felt it was desirable, in theory, they could say that ring that you gave to that woman to make her your wife was not your property. Since it was not your property, you were never married. And everything you've done up until now, you assumed you were married, therefore living together, sexual relations together, all of that was not in order to create the marriage, it was because you thought you were married, but you weren't. And so one example that they did do was the following. If a man were to write a get for his wife, give it to a shliach, a messenger, to deliver to her. And once he left the room, decide, you know what? I'm nullifying the get. He can do that. He says, you know what? I've changed my mind. The rabbi said, if you did that, we would be, they did hafgat kiddushin. They said the marriage never took place. Your money that you gave her was never yours to give. Because the problem is this, the man says, here's your get. The messenger takes the get. They usually talk about going overseas. All right, so he lives in Rome, she's in Israel. He gives it to the shliach gets on the boat, the shliach sets sail across the Mediterranean, takes a month maybe in those days, depending on the winds. The guy, as soon as he left the house, he said, you know what, forget it. I'm not going to give her a get. And I'm not going to give her the money that would come with the get because she gets her ketubah. She gets the divorce papers. The guy who's delivering it thinks it's legitimate. The Beit Din may be there who's supervising things to some help out to make sure everything is according to all the rules. They think it's legitimate. She gets married, has kids, and then several years later, lo and behold, the first husband comes to Jerusalem, it comes to Israel, and sees her, and he says, and with the kids, where'd they come from? She says, from my second marriage after we got divorced. He says, what divorce? We never got divorced. The children are mamzerim. So in order to prevent such a thing happening, the rabbi said, if you do something like that, it would be hafka'at kiddushin. They would uproot the marriage. And you know, they're not taking it, that's not lightly done. Because now, again, sexual mores change in the world, all right? But the rabbi said, no man has sexual relations for just the sake of pleasure. In Adam say biatznut. What's the word I'm looking for? Licentiousness. You know, you don't have one night stands just for fun. A Jewish man doesn't do that. Well, we know that's not true anymore, but right. So to make the married life that they had until then just a relationship that was not under the auspices of marriage was not a lightly done. Right, you follow?
Doesn't that ruin everything for the women and their children?
That's why the rabbis did that.
No, I mean.
If they had not done that, the SOB who would do such a thing, yes, would create problems for his wife and any children. But that's precisely why the rabbis did that. Now, to move to modern times, what is since most, let's take today, Toronto. Okay, Chaim Yankel won't give his wife a divorce. She's stuck. She's an aguna. She's chained to him. Well, what can we do? Well, if he's in an Orthodox shul and he's an Orthodox man and he's concerned with other things, they can say, well, you know what? We're not going to give you an aliyah to the Torah until you give your wife a get. That doesn't work. He's in business. Nobody in our community will do business with you. That doesn't work. The other kinds of pressures that might be exerted. But ultimately, that's all they can do. Now, on the other hand, and this has happened, in some Orthodox communities, all of the wives tell their husbands, we're not going to the mikveh until he gives her a get. So now they're sharing in a little bit of difficulty. And they sometimes try to convince him to give her a get. And be as persuasive as they can. And if you ever see the first The Sopranos, the very first episode of Sopranos? First episode of Sopranos has a case where I assume they're Hasidim because of the way they were dressed, go to Tony Soprano to get him to convince a guy to give their daughter a get. That's based on true life. As things have been known to happen. And some rabbi got thrown in jail because he was doing something similar to that. In Israel, if a man refuses to give a get and the court says the rabbinic court says he should give a get, they can, if they want, they're reluctant to do so again, turn to the civil courts. And the civil courts tell him you have to listen to the rabbis, and if he doesn't, he can be thrown into jail for contempt. And somebody stayed in jail for 20 years or something like that. He was very happy. All right? Huh?
Oh,
So now, in the conservative, no, so what are other solutions? In the reform, they permit the wife to give a get, I believe, today. Certainly doing reconstructions. In conservative movement, we have what we call Hafkat Kiddushin. If everything else fails, go to a special Beit Din, and they will order the husband to give a get. If he refuses to give a get, they will dissolve the marriage from ab initio. Right? Voices have been raised in the Orthodox community to do the same kind of thing, and it has fallen mostly on deaf ears. We also know the following. It is found in rabbinic sources that if the court orders a person to give a get, every Jewish man really has a good neshama, good soul. But sometimes the Yetzer Hara, the evil urge, the evil aspect of life, gets in the way. So we have to remove that Yetzer Hara. How do we do that? We beat him with lashes until he says, I want of my own free will to give her a divorce.
fair.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's perfectly fair. Unfortunately, we don't have courts that can do that today. Okay, but that, so that was known to be done because the Yetzer Hara gets in the way. It's not that you don't want to do it; it's just your Yetzer Hara is holding on to you, and you can get rid of that Yetzer Hara. You beat him away.
Makes sense.
Now, in some jurisdictions, such as Ontario and in Quebec, there is a degree of recourse to the civil courts. You can have the courts issue an order that no impediment to remarriage of either one of them can be allowed. If either party stands in the way of the other person getting remarried, the court will not listen to any of their pleas. There's some fancy language along it. Yeah, but it can't guarantee it, right? In the United States, in the conservative movement, there was what we call the Lieberman Clause. And the Lieberman Clause basically said that you would issue again. If not, then the civil courts can fine you. But especially in the States, that's religion and state and government and all of that. And no, I forgot to set that. Oh, I want to do the tape, the ex-president tonight. Anyway. So anyway, yeah, I'll hear all the good parts. Yeah, but that's a question. Now, in the Orthodox world, they have a lot of rabbis now have started demanding that there be a prenuptial. And the prenuptial agreement is for both parties, but really it's aimed at the man. And if he refuses to give his wife a get, there's a certain fine that is issued, and it keeps going up and up and up and up until he gives the get. And it's written in language that theoretically could be upheld in court.
What recourse does the woman have? Let's say that.
Well, those are the recourses that exist. Either no recourse whatsoever, a Beit Din or a community that will back it up in some way, to Hafka'at Kiddushin, annulment of the marriage, which you find under very limited circumstances in the conservative movement, and in the Reform and I think Reconstructionists, they allow either party to give a get. But that's one of the serious issues that still exist in the Jewish world that has to be overcome at some point in time, God willing. But the way things go and the ways the world is today, I don't see it happening in the Orthodox world. Then that's when you call in Tony Soprano. But you know, and of course, you know what happened as a result of that. Takes over half of their business. No, not the Jewish mob. Soprano takes. They had a motel, and he makes them give right over half of the motel. Anyway, that's why it's a dangerous route to go. All right, so. Oh, now, according to the Torah, a man can have more than one wife. Polygamy was certainly part and parcel of the ancient world, not just in throughout the world that existed. We do know that polygamy, first of all, was more often to be found in agrarian societies than in urban societies. Agrarian societies, you know, the more kids you have, the more land you can plant and harvest, and therefore economically, it didn't hurt to have more than one wife with the extra kids. I'm putting it in economic terms solely. In urban life, a lot of kids didn't necessarily help. If you're a merchant, the extra mouths to feed were not necessarily beneficial to your economics. So polygamy was not as prevalent in urban areas. When we go through, we read about the sages of the Mishnah and the Talmud, none of them seem to have a second wife. They almost all seem to be monogamous. We know that, of course, in Christian circles, monogamy became the accepted position in social life. The Jews who lived in Christian lands could still practice polygamy, and some did. But it was a bit of a problem in the minds of their non-Jewish neighbors, and the Jewish community was well aware of that. It wasn't highly prevalent, but it was a possibility. So around the year 1000, Rabbeinu Gershom, who was the outstanding authority of his day, this is in the 11th century, issued a series of takanot, of decrees. And these were probably takanot that were really as a result of an assembly of a bunch of leading Jewish figures at that time. They would have trade fairs. That's where merchants would gather to sell their goods, what have you. And Jews often got together these things to have a council. And so the takanot of Rabbeinu Gershom did several things. First of all, it said a man may not have more than one wife without the permission of 100 rabbis. So the escape clause was there, but you know, get 100 rabbis to agree to anything is pretty big. A man may not divorce his wife against her will. A man, therefore, if a woman was incompetent, he could not divorce her. If she were a rebellious wife, she would refuse to have sexual relations, then that's a different story, all right? Those are the two major things that stand up in front in terms of marital relations. They also put on penalty of excommunication anybody who'd read somebody else's mail, because people carried mail back and forth, and sometimes they got bored and read something they shouldn't have been reading. So the Takanav, 100 rabbis, so let us say, for example, the wife was incompetent, and he's got little children he needs to take care of. In the normal way in those days, the wife took care of the family, and so to get remarried. Right? There's a couple of the. So now the Takanot Rabbeinu Gershom applied to the Ashkenazic world. It was not part of the Sephardic world. Muslims had practiced polygamy. The Eastern areas also, they practiced polygamy. So there wasn't a social pressure to eliminate it. But again, the reality was there weren't those many Jews who practiced polygamy. Again, the economics of it were not so good, but it existed. But we know that, for example, in 12th century Egypt, Maimonides born 1105, 12th century Egypt, most women had written into their ketubah that their husband could not take a second wife or even a female servant without permission of the first wife, or else he was fined that he had to pay her a large sum of money. Okay. So there was so you see here already there was, at least in some Sephardic circles, a limitation on polygamy. But in like Yemen, for example, that did not exist. And when Israel was created and Yemenite Jews came to Israel, some of them did have more than one wife, but it was accepted by all the rabbis, or at least the authority figures in Israel, that only if you came in with more than one wife, you were allowed to retain those wives, but you could not marry any more. And no one else in the future could marry more than one woman. No, you didn't have to choose. You could maintain it.
Otherwise, you'd have to choose.
Oh, otherwise you have to choose, yeah. And that was certainly not fair to anybody that's involved with it. I mean, sometimes two women did love the same guy, or at least they put up with him. They learned how to put up with him. All right. Okay, so any questions on, okay. The more deadly subject. First, on the biblical level, it's not clear at all how our ancestors understood what happens when you die. The only mention we have anywhere in the biblical text, except for the book of Daniel, kind of hints at a shadowy existence, perhaps after this life, very much similar to what you find in Greek traditions and stuff. You have the story of the ghost of Samuel being summoned by a witch to speak to King Saul. But the basic theology that underpins the Torah and most of the Bible is belief in reward and punishment in this world. Right? Very clearly spelled out in a number of passages. If you do good, good will come to you. If you do bad, bad will come to you. Well, now, the reality of life is not so simple. It's the book of Job makes very clear, because the book of Job challenges that very principle about the suffering of the righteous. And two different ideas were born, and how they became part and parcel of Jewish theology, I can't answer. But one, which is probably the earlier, was the idea of the resurrection of the dead. And that is mentioned in the book of Daniel. Some go to sleep forever and some go to sleep to wake in the future, something like that, the language used there. But the book of Daniel, according to most modern critics, is in the 2nd century, before the Common Era, the 160s. But it's associated with the prophet Daniel, who lives about 350 years earlier. So this was taken to mean that every person who lived would be physically resurrected. Their soul would re-enter into that body, and reward and punishment would then be meted out on a very physical level. And it's not clear if that means that you live for a while, you die again. None of that is, and nowhere in Jewish tradition is it clearly spelled out. The Talmud has bits and pieces here and there, but you won't find a book that really, up until more modern era, when people started trying to formulate it, that made clear what that all meant. There is a midrash found in rabbinic circles that said it can be compared to a king who had a orchard, fabulous fruit. But of course, he's worried people are stealing it. So you have to have guards. Well, you know how reliable guards are. Some of them were stealing it. So he comes up with a brilliant idea. I'll hire 2 guards. One's a blind man and the other's lame. Okay, so together they can guard the fruit, but they can't steal it. Blind man can't find it, the lame man can't reach it. Okay? But they can scare away people from coming in to steal. So one day the king comes and discovers some fruit's missing. And the blind man says, you can't blame me for that. I can't see anything. And the lame man says, you can't blame me because I can't reach any of the fruit. But the king, being a wise king, figures it out and realizes that the lame man had gotten onto the shoulders of the blind man, guided him to the fruit, and they shared the fruit. So what did he do to punish them? He put the lame man on top of the shoulders of the blind man and beat him that way. So too is it with the body and the soul, the neshama. The neshama says, God, what do you want from me? I have no ability to do anything. I'm just a breath, as it were, the soul. And the physical body says, what do you want of me, God? I can't do anything willingly. I'm just flesh and bone. I don't make choices. So God puts the soul back into the body and punishes them together. Right? So that's the midrash that the rabbis use to explain the idea of the resurrection of the dead. And that is actually the meaning of the first blessing of the Amidah. Baruch atah Hashem mechayei hametim, praise the God who resurrects the dead. That's a real translation. Brings the dead to life. Now, somewhere along the lines, either simultaneously or after a little bit or what, came a different vision. And that vision was the idea, what, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call heaven and hell. That every one of us has within us that spark of life, that neshama. And when we die and we're released from the physical plane, we can rise to a different plane of existence. If we were good, we were rewarded. If we were bad, we were punished. Now, the rabbis understood it this way. It suggests that there is no one who doesn't do bad, and there's no one who doesn't do good. All right, so now, the bad, or let's stick with the good. So the good guy, let's say he did a little bit bad in this world. So when he dies, he's punished for a short time in Gehenna, in hell, for lack of a better term. And when that period of time is up, he's paid his debt to society. He goes to Gan Eden, Garden of Eden, paradise. The wicked person, how wicked is he? He must have done some good. So his longer term, his punishment lasts longer until he's free to go to whatever level he can in Gan Eden. The real villains in life are in Gehenna for a full year. If that's not enough to make up for their sins in this world, their soul is snuffed out. Then the choice villains of history, Pharaoh, Hitler, Yamach Shemo, etc., may be still down there suffering. Yeah, okay. So now, but that doesn't, all right, so you have these two ideas, and how they mix together is an open question. Do you go to Gan Eden while you're waiting to be resurrected, and you're resurrected, it stays that way forever? Or is it you sleep until you're resurrected, and you're resurrected, and then you die again, and your soul goes to Gan Eden? Different opinions on how that all put together. Furthermore, why is it we see some really bad people doing so well in this world? Well, because the decision was this: they're getting all of their reward for whatever good they've done in this lifetime. So when they die, they have nothing to look forward to but punishment. While the good people who suffer, all of us do some things wrong. So those who are good and suffer, they're getting whatever punishment is coming to them in this world. So in the world to come, they will have only reward. And there's a story about a rabbi who was very poor, and his students prayed for him. And he woke up one morning, and there in his living room in his house was a golden leg from a table. You know, you go sell the gold, melt it down, you make a lot of money on it. And he has a dream that night that was one of the four legs for the table that he's going to eat at in the world to come. So he says, take it back. Otherwise, my table in the world to come is not going to be on four solid legs. All right, so that is the general background. The idea that there is some spark in us that goes on after our life, however it is defined, however it plays its way out. And that has a big impact on the morning rituals that we have. First of all, we have the body of a person was a repository for their neshama, their soul. It is to be paid respect, but it's not the same as the neshama. But because perhaps influenced in part by the idea of resurrection of the dead and other things, the Jewish ideal was that the body was supposed to be allowed to return to dust in a normal process. So that we are not supposed to do anything to that physical body to make it go away faster, not to cremate, not to put chemicals on it to cause it to decompose faster. Nor are we supposed to do anything that would stop it, to embalm, for example. It's supposed to be allowed to go to earth in a natural process. And originally, and still in Israel, the body is wrapped in shrouds and placed in the earth. No caskets at all. Well, sometimes what they will do is they will carry, sometimes they have a casket, they carry it into the cemetery. They take it apart when they put the body. I saw that in the funeral of Yitzhak Rabin. Sometimes it is just a bier. They carry it on and slide the body into the, and they may have some stones on the side, and they put top on that, some other stones, so the dirt's not directly on the corpse. Here in North America, almost invariably, it's done in a casket. It's traditionally supposed to be a wooden casket, not because that allows it to, again, to decompose naturally. So that is all for the sake of the body. Now, two things. That is, one is why we traditionally frowned upon autopsies, because you have to cut open the body. and you're dismembering the body, you're doing things to it. So in general, autopsies were forbidden in Jewish circles, except under rare circumstances, if that autopsy was necessary to determine if there was like a murder or other things like that, or the person suffered from some kind of genetic malady that others in his family might be affected by, and that they could be helped if we knew better. Those are the two traditional ways. We mentioned before, we talked about donation of organs. It's very clear that a large part of the Jewish world has accepted the idea that you are allowed to donate organs after death. Determining death is more of a difficult thing. So traditionally, again, in traditional circles, the men and women are put in what are called tachrichin, burial shrouds. A man is wrapped in a tallis. Traditionally, one fringe of the tallis is cut off, and the body is washed, cleansed, wrapped in these shrouds for the funeral. All right, so, and then whatever comes to the soul after their burial, that comes to the soul, and all kinds of stories and what have you that usually for that. Now, the other thing is that if I am due punishment, is there any way that the living can, as it were, put money in the bank for the dead, to use that terminology? And the idea was suggested that when you perform a mitzvah for the sake of the soul of a departed individual, that in some mystical way can have an effect. So that Kaddish, this is what I'm getting to, the idea of Kaddish is that the person saying Kaddish sanctifies the name of God in public. That's what it's all about. Yitkadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah. May his name, great name, be praised. Yitkadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah. And that requires a quorum of 10 to do the Kiddush Hashem in public. The public has to be there. So that's where the minyan's presence for Kaddish comes in. Kaddish has nothing to do with the dead. The only time we even mention the dead in any form of the Kaddish is what's called the burial Kaddish. And the Kaddish, we say we complete a tractate of the Talmud. That's the only time there's any mention of deceased people. Otherwise, it is just really a prayer sanctifying the name of God. Over the course of the centuries, that has become in the folk mind a prayer for the dead. The idea of having someone to say Kaddish for you. One of the reasons why you had to have a son, because women didn't say Kaddish in previous generations. So you wanted to have a son who would say Kaddish. That's why going to minyans during the course of the year, so that the person would say Kaddish. That's the background behind it. And I tell people, I've done this. If you can't say, you're traveling, whatever, you can't say Kaddish, you should try if you can, but you don't say Kaddish by yourself. That's not, you're not doing anything. You're just empty words. So instead, I say, study something. Study something from the Torah. Study something from a Jewish book of some kind. Performing the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, of the study of Torah for the sake of the deceased. And I think because there are two aspects to Kaddish. There's a mystical, which is what I've been alluding to, that has understood in that vein to have an effect upon the deceased. That's why you'll find people often say in Orthodox synagogues, may the neshama have an aliyah. You did something, you made tzedakah, you did this or that for the sake of the deceased. And so the idea behind it that has some kind of help beyond this world. That's the mystical side. And I don't downplay it. Some people like it, some people don't. That's fine. On the other hand, saying Kaddish has a powerful impact on the person saying it. When you go to the synagogue, you say Kaddish for the year. When you, on the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the death, you say Kaddish. And you remember your beloved ones. That has an impact on you. And I've seen this over the years in the rabbinate, where people would come to the synagogue for the year of St. Kaddish. Some didn't, that was it. Some, there was something that remained after that, and they still kept this connection that didn't exist before that. So both of those, I think, are important to understand. And that's why when people say to me, can I hire somebody to say Kaddish? I say, yeah, you can. I mean, yeah, that's doable, but it's better for you to say Kaddish. And if you can't, to do something else that's a positive Jewish activity on their sake, rather than hiring somebody. But if you want to hire somebody and then you do it when you can, right? So now, what is our obligation? Our rabbinic tradition teaches there are 7 relatives that we have an obligation to mourn for. Those are your father and your mother, your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter, your spouse. Okay, those are the 7 that we understood from rabbinic tradition that you have an obligation to mourn. The mourning for a parent is more stringent than the mourning for the others. So that we have time periods. There's the day of the burial. Between the time of death and the time the individual is buried, traditionally it's understood that your major concern at that time is to taking care of the dead. Therefore, you are not obligated to perform positive mitzvot. That means when I sat down to eat breakfast after my father passed away, I did not say hamotzi over the bread. If somebody I could not be counted in the minyan in the synagogue because I didn't have an obligation to pray. I didn't put on talis and tefillin because I didn't have an obligation to put on talit and tefillin. The idea being when you should be osek with the mitzvah of burying the dead.
It's the same thing applied for spouse.
Any of the 7. Any of the 7, your first obligation is with the dead. And therefore, traditionally, you are freed from positive mitzvah. After death and burial, after burial, then you have to perform mitzvot again. So that the day of Aninut is just until burial. Ideally, a person should be buried as quickly as possible. In today's world, where there's less issues about because you have refrigeration and putrefaction is not necessarily an issue, but in ancient world, not to bury quickly would be problematic. Okay? So ideally within 24 hours of death. And today with people coming in and out for funerals, we sometimes delay a day or 2. But generally speaking, it's supposed to be done as quickly as possible. My father was passed away at 3 o'clock in the morning. We had his funeral that next afternoon.
Before sunset, right?
Yeah. Although in theory, in Jerusalem, you have to be buried right away, even if it's at night.
Oh, wow.
Hmm?
Outside Jerusalem, you can't be buried at night. And inside Jerusalem, you can be.
You in Jerusalem, you are buried as quickly by including at night. Outside Jerusalem, yeah, you don't bury at night. Plus, sometimes there's also a union at the cemetery that makes its own issues. All right. There's been problems. Okay. Some cemeteries you can't bury on Sunday because of the union.
Jewish cemetery?
Yeah, they have to have workers, and the workers are unionized. Yeah, there's cemeteries.
Which cemetery in Toronto?
Not in Toronto. I didn't say, I'm not Jerusalem, we're not talking Jerusalem or Toronto, we're talking about New York, for
Yeah,
example.
you said New York.
Yeah, anything's possible. All right,
Okay.
so, all right, so the procedure is, the person is nifter, you make arrangements for the burial. The body should not be left alone. Traditionally, it was very clear that the body was guarded against vermin, against anybody doing anything to the body.
Why is that?
Which part?
Any of it?
Well, first
Why-
part is
why
because
the guarding? Why
the first,
why the concern? Strictly sanitary or is it more?
I think it's strictly sanitary. Well, it's covered. It's not, leave a body around in Israel in the middle of the summer for 24 hours. It'll start putrefying right away and it will stink. So that's part of it. Part of it is rats. So to protect the body from any kind of vermin, you had guards about. Yes, it's to honor the body, but it also was very clearly protection. To protect the body from predators.
So that it was honored, so that it would be buried.
Yeah, well, not mutilated,
Why not mutilate it?
because it's
Because it would not be honoring.
well, yeah, but just to have not just for the burial, for the very presence of the person. You know, to have somebody, some creature gnawing on a corpse is not exactly.
I agree, but some of the things that the Jewish traditions all around burial
Like,
are about.
Kvod Hamet,
honoring-
the Kvod Hamet, honoring the
and
dead.
The goal is the same, the method is different, so
Yeah.
it's the same idea, but they get there.
Yeah, no question. There's nothing, cremation in and of itself is nothing wrong with it. That's the way some traditions honor their dead. All right.
Embalm a body.
Well, the embalming, yeah, but I'll say, not a Jewish tradition.
But
And
there's a non-Jewish tradition that is, I think, also has the same motive.
I think when
I
when embalming the body is meant to just preserve it till burial,
Yes,
that's fine. But when embalming the body is meant to prevent it from putrefying altogether, that's coming into another kind of ideology. No. Mummification. Well, when you put in enough chemicals into the body, it can stay around for a long time. I know President Abraham Lincoln's body was preserved for a long time because it was stolen one time from his tomb. Yeah. So, what? Lenin. Yeah, but I think he's in pretty bad shape. I don't think they did such a good job. But anyway, yeah, and a lot depends on your culture, the religions. You're right. All of those tie into what the whole Egyptian idea behind death and how you dealt with death and all of that. All of these are part and parcel. For example, a few years ago, the local, who's a bishop here, cardinal bishop, gave hell to about funerals in which people were crying at the funeral. Because you should be happy. The soul is going to God.
or not.
Or, well, maybe that's why you're crying, but anyway.
Yeah.
So, all right. So
A small percentage.
I don't know. I just remember there was a whole thing about how a funeral should be treated. And some people today in other situations do life celebration of life. Right? We in Judaism treasure life. Lo metim hallelujah, the dead cannot praise you, nor those who go silent to the grave. Mitzvot are for this world. Jewish tradition teaches that this is the world we should be most concerned with. and not so much the afterlife. I'm going to stop here because it's already almost time to go. I'll continue a little bit more next week on this. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Night, thank
Good
you.
night. Night.